This has been a very interesting discussion, and Dr. Zandi just said something that I just wanted to point out and just emphasize a little bit. And I would agree with the gentlelady that this is it's a long-term problem that we have here, and it would be good if we could work this out together in a bipartisan manner. We do too little of that in Congress, but this is one we really ought to work on together. And perhaps the rest of Congress ought to look to this committee, because the chairwoman has worked over the last year and a half in a very bipartisan manner, and I commend her for that. Doctor, you just mentioned that if, for example, we announced that we are going to drill offshore or in ANWR or wherever, where we know that there are significant quantities of energy available to us that we've essentially put off limits, that you would see that essentially directly affect the price, because the markets would know that we're serious about this. We're actually going there to get this, even though we may not see that oil for some years. And that's why some have argued, well, we're not going to see that oil for 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, whatever. And therefore, why do we have to do this now? And that's why I think we should have done it 3 years, 5 years, 10 years ago, and have voted consistently to do that. But that's the past. At this point, as you indicated, it would be reflected immediately in the markets because of speculation. Now, this is something the Republican leadership poo-pooed. They said, oh, speculation, that's not a big deal. I agreed with the Democrats. I think that is part of it. Not the whole thing, but it's part of it. And so that's why it is so important that we act sooner rather than later to actually announce we're doing this, even if we don't see that oil. We'll see it reflected in the prices very quickly in the downside because of the speculative part of that. Is that correct?
Yeah, let me just point out, though, the conduit through which this would affect current price may be, as another conduit, that you have producers, global energy producers, that know or feel like prices are going to be higher in the future. Mm-hmm. Therefore, you're going to keep more oil in the ground today, mm-hmm, because you're going to get a much higher price down the road. Mm-hmm. So if they sense that there's going to be new supplies coming on and the price may not be higher, mm-hmm, then they're going to be much more forthcoming with supplies today, mm-hmm, and it'll bring current price down.
Okay. And again, I just want to reiterate what I said before, is that even though I and many talk about increasing supply now, drilling in ANWR, Outer Continental Shelf, that's only part of the thing that we have to do as well. Right. I mean, we clearly have to emphasize increased technologies of the future, whether it's wind, solar, biomass, geothermal, all those things are part of this picture as well as making it possible to build new oil refineries in this country, which we haven't done in over 30 years. So it needs to be a comprehensive energy policy, and again, I wish this committee was in charge of it, because I bet we could solve it in about a week due to the great work of the chairwoman.
On this issue, I am not that sure, but let me just say, Dr. Zandi, that look, we all support drilling. And what we are saying is that there are a bunch of oil companies today that are holding leases in about 68 million acres of land, and they're not drilling it. And we are saying, use it or leave it. We're going to take it away. So you mentioned that probably those companies are speculating about oil prices going up. And that might be the reason why, where they can drill today, they're not doing it. So without a single new lease or a single new drilling authorization, we can get 4.8 million barrels of oil a day in this country without going into ANWR. But that is not the question that I wanted to make today. That was the statement of the day.
This is an energy policy debate.
Yeah, but you know, here
I'll give you my 3 cents, though.
It doesn't matter the topic. We end up talking about ANWR.
Yeah, right.
So we got to have ready our talking points. Yes. About the holiday, the pay tax holiday that you mentioned as being part of the to be part of the second stimulus package. There are some critics that maintain that while employees could see immediate relief, employers could be burdened by administrative challenges. If their concern that small firms will face compliance issues, and that this could potentially minimize the benefits.
Right. No, excellent point. That is the single most significant negative of that particular proposal. You have to turn the switch on and off. For many, particularly small businesses, they don't have a payroll company that's managing their affairs, and if they don't do it right, they'll get penalized, although you might construct the legislation so that they don't over a period of time. The other downside is companies more than likely will try to figure out ways to include compensation that they would pay out at some other point in that period so that they wouldn't have to withhold payroll tax. So I'm not saying there's no downside. There are, and that clearly is, in my view, the most significant downside, the administrative costs, particularly to small businesses. But I bet if you ask them, would you want the cash in exchange for a little bit of administrative difficulty? I bet they take the cash.
Ms. Burstein, I would like to hear your comments on this one.
I agree with what Dr. Zandi just said. What we have seen, there are the larger employers who do use outside service providers, and I know that there are certain payroll companies that can handle this. And this is an issue that we looked at a little bit when we were looking at what type of consumer rebate, whether it could be a check or whether it would be faster to get the rebate payment to consumers by actually doing it through employer withholding. So it's a very similar issue, and we did a little bit of investigation there. I am a little more concerned, as Dr. Zandi said, about the small businesses that don't necessarily use those same outside payroll providers, and that there might be more of a burden. But remember, on the small business, the self-employed person, pays payroll tax twice, so it probably is a significant benefit for a small business person who plays as the employer and as the employee. And so, it's possible that that they may be able to get more access to more of the software that is out there, and perhaps if it was widespread enough, the costs could be minimized. The question is it something that could be done? How long would that take? What would be the startup time? If you wanted to turn this on more quickly, there might be more of a burden.
Okay. And Dr. Zandi, in your testimony, on page 5, you provided a fiscal economic bang for the buck, and you have the payroll tax holiday at 1.29, across the board tax cut 1.03, accelerated depreciation 0.27. So as we discussed before, our budget is limited, and when we are considering a second stimulus package, we got to be targeted, we got to be specific, we need to know what of the many things that we're going to be considering is going to have the most positive impact in terms of our economy. How do you come up with these numbers?
It's based on a simulation of a macroeconometric model that I've constructed for the purposes of doing this kind of an evaluation. I've done it a number of times. I did it in preparation for the 01 tax, the stimulus plan, and updated it for the January-February period for the most recent stimulus plan. I have a much more detailed document. If you're interested, I'd be very happy to provide it with you to describe the methodology.
It really caught my attention.
Yeah.
Mr. Connolly, this is my last question. In the housing bill that we passed yesterday, there are relief for funding. You saw what we did, the federal government regarding Bear Stearns, now Freddie Mac, Fannie Mae. You represent small banks. Yeah. What would you say will be an action taken by Congress that could prove beneficial for small banks to continue the great work that you're doing?
Well, I think the improvement to the FHA programs, GSE reform, temporary FHA program, all great things. There's a critical thing I want to mention, though, and that is we need to recall the lessons that we've learned from the previous go-rounds. Coming from New England, I recall the real estate debacle of the early 90s, and a lot of problems that cause small businesses to be squeezed out of business as a result of performing, non-performing loans. And just this weekend, I heard from some of my colleagues around the country that that regulators are beginning to ask for appraisals on performing loans. And it's important that we not force currently performing loans into a distressed condition by making such requests. So I think we really want to be careful on the regulatory side that we not add fuel to the fire. Those lessons that we learned 5, 10, 20 years ago are so critically important to bear in mind.